can see you there. Hi, my name is Jesters. You might know me from some movies as The Wave or Chess Club. Today, I'm here to talk to you about the medieval ages, but specifically the daily life in the Middle Ages. I'm here to talk to you about the Pope, the peasant woman, the lord, the knight, the monk, the nun, the noblewoman, the king, and the jester. Let's start with the Pope. In the morning, the Pope wakes up. He gets a bite to eat. As the Pope, he eats very fancy. The Pope lived very long because he had all the medicine that he needed. But the Pope had to pray most of the day. Then for the rest of the day, the Pope sleeps. Now let's move on to the peasant and the peasant woman. There were two types of peasants, the farmers and the craftsmen. The farmers worked on the fields daily, harvesting and fertilizing the plants. Some farmers were free, but most of the farmers were not free. They were bonded to the land. The farmers that were free were called villeins, and they can leave any time they want from the farm. The craftsmen usually trained by the parents, who were also craftsmen. Craftsmen made always some goods for sale. When the wives didn't help, she usually took care of the children. They also slept in their work clothes. As for the lords, they had to stay in the castles or manors. Usually the lords wake up at dawn. They would have breakfast. Then they would have to attend businesses regarding land. They usually had to fight for the king in times of war. The lords had to pray a lot also. Speaking about the lords, the knights were also kind of like the lords. They had to stay in the castle or manors, and they had to fight for the king. They had to honor their weapon skills, and they had to keep always fit. During the day, the knight has to think of strategies for fighting. The knights also prayed the same time as the lords. The knights would eat 3 times a day. After the last meal of the day, the knight would be entertained by music, dancing, jugglers, acrobats, or jesters. The monk. They were based on 3 main vows. The vow of poverty, chastity, and obedience. The monks were dedicated to worship, reading, and manual labor. The monks had to be in the church for several hours of the day reading the Bible. The monk had to wash and cook for the monastery. The monk produces wine, ale, and honey. He grows vegetables and grain for cooking. They also had to provide medical care for the community. The monks had to educate the boys and novices. As for the nuns, they basically did the same thing as the monks. They both had the same vows. They washed and cooked for the monastery. They raised vegetables and grain for cooking. They provided medical care for the community, and nuns provided education for novices. But the only thing that the nuns did differently from the monks is that they spinned, weaved, and made embroidery. The noblewomen were married to the lords, and they would basically have the same schedule as them. They would wake up at dawn, and the first thing they would do would be praying, and then later they would have breakfast. The noblewoman would include decisions about tournaments, betrothals, marriages, and poetry. The noblewomen had to take place of their husbands when they were absent. The noblewomen had to take care of finances and other things. As for the king, he had to take responsibilities for the whole kingdom. At first, the king would wake up, pray, and then would have breakfast. The king also had to pray a lot throughout the whole day. The king had to make new laws and take care of everything. The king had more time for working and less time at home. Instead of the king's children living with him, they would live in households of their own. And that leaves me with the jester. He spent his whole entire day entertaining the king and the lords. He was called a fool. That's all I have to say about him. Well, I've been your host, Richard Jesters. Have a nice day.